Hi everybody and welcome to this Stahls TV class, How to Overcome Dye Migration and Performance Wear Challenges. I'm Courtney Kubitza with Stahls TV, and if this is your first time attending a Stahls TV event, just keep in mind that this is live and interactive. So if you have questions throughout, feel free to chat them into the chat or the question box. Courtney Singer with Stahls TV is standing by, so she'll be able to respond to you or draw the questions out for me to respond on camera so we can cover a few things. I know with dye migration there tends to be a lot of technical questions, so I want to make sure you guys get an understanding on how to overcome it. So if you have questions, feel free to chat those out. When it comes to printing performance wear, there's a variety of challenges that we normally run into with polyester fabrics and dry fits that we don't run into with other fabrics like cotton t-shirts. Some challenges are like scorch marks, finding a transfer that appeals to the silky, stretchy fabric. Sometimes it's coming over dye migration, which is what we're specifically going to focus on today. It looked like in the poll in the beginning of the session there were about 70% of you guys that fell victim to dye migration. So for the 30% of you that haven't, feel lucky. But the good news is we'll be able to give you some tips so when you come across it and you see it, you'll know how to overcome it in your business as well. So let's talk a little bit about dye migration. To get started and understand what we have to do to fix it, we have to understand the problem. So what happens that cause the dye migration and how exactly can we fix that? So in understanding dye migration, basically dye migration or bleeding as it's more traditionally called happens whenever the inks in a polyester garment are opened up under a heat. So you can see that under a high heat of a heat press, which is what we're going to focus on today. And you can also see it under a dryer of a screen print press. When I say high heat, you're looking at something that's over excess of 280 degrees. When you think about heat transfers in the heat transfer world, that's really not that high of a temperature. So basically, a lot of garments can have a tendency to come victim to dye migration. Now you're probably wondering and you're probably asking, how come some of my polyester garments are fine and they don't come victim to dye migration? I don't see an issue with that. Traditionally, not all garments are going to cause that issue. And we'll talk about that in a little bit as well and how we can try to test them and overcome that. But basically what happens is the inks in these polyester garments, like the football uniform that I'm showing you here, open up under that high heat. They transform from the solid form that they are in the garment into a gas, and then they're susceptible to re-sublimating and re-coming through your decoration. So they can come through your heat transfer, they could come through your plastisol inks, because they're now movable and they're now able to come up through those types of decorations just in the main form that they sublimated the fabric. Now when I talk about sublimation, dye sublimation, and that being a factor, a lot of people start to shake their head and they think, I never realized that my 100% polyester dry fit or my team uniform is printed in a way that is dye sublimation. When you think of sublimation, you always think of kind of a motocross jersey and things like that, but even some of these garments that we'll talk about later as low bleed can have the tendency to fall victim to dye migration. So this is a little bit different from opacity, so keep in mind this is actually the dyes from the garment coming up over the transfer. So the transfer is built to be white, to be a vibrant, true color transfer, and that's compromised specifically by the inks in these garments. So let's talk a little bit about the time period, and I'll zoom in so you guys can see an example of what happens whenever we press something and it falls victim to dye migration, and then we'll show you exactly what happens at the heat press as well. The example that I have here, zoomed in at the table, is going to be an example of, actually it looks pretty cool with the dots coming through, but this is supposed to be a solid, true white number and not have the pattern of this printed, sublimated garment through the number. And this is what can happen whenever you fall victim to dye migration. So basically, the inks from this gray and black pattern shirt came up through my white number and have caused this pattern that I'm seeing here now on the garment. Another challenge whenever you decorate even with solids, that a navy jersey may turn light blue numbers, or a red jersey might turn pink. I'm sure if you're printing for team uniforms, it's probably not what you were going for the local football team. So this is exactly what's going to happen when we run into dye migration. And the time period varies as well. So keep in mind that with dye migration, it can happen immediately at the heat press, and I'm actually going to test this garment later, and you'll see it probably happen almost on spot immediately because this garment has so many unstable dyes. But some of the ones that are a little bit less traditional, that are considered low bleed garments like this football uniform, this might not happen until 72 hours later. So anywhere from immediately to 72 hours is traditionally when you might see dye migration. Now, keep in mind that some of these garments, and we'll talk about how to test them as well to ensure that your heat transfer is going to block the dyes, but dye migration can also occur after the sale or after the 72 hours. So one tip that a lot of decorators will try is to use a lower heat transfer that applies at a temperature at 280 or lower to help inhibit the dye migration, which works perfect for your application and while it's at the shop. But keep in mind if that garment goes into a hot car or in a duffel bag or a hot dryer, that heat could cause the inks to again open up and the garment to then sublimate through your transfer. So it may come back a little bit later. That's why it's always great to test, which we'll talk about ways to do that, and choose a transfer that's right and is going to overcome the dye migration in your garment. So when you're looking at the fabric types that are susceptible and that you should worry about with dye migration, let's talk about what types of fabrics and then let's talk about how to test them. So cotton garments are not going to be likely to fall victim to dye migration. So it's not an issue that you're going to see with 100% cotton t-shirts or sweatshirts. This is an issue you're only going to see in garments with 100% polyester or that have a high polyester content. So it may be a 95% polyester and a 5% spandex, or a tri-blend that has a very high polyester count. These are the types of garments that are going to fall victim to dye migration. The reason being is that polyesters are the only type of fabric that are actually dye sublimated whenever the dyes go into the fabric to change the color of it. So all of the other fabrics are printed in a different type of technology, which is why we don't usually run into it there. Colors is another thing that you may run into. So I have decorators that have told me, I run into it with my reds, my blacks, my navy shirts, but I heat pressed the exact same shirt and it was, pale yellow and I didn't have any issues with dye migration. Remember that the darker dyes are traditionally more stable and more likely to come through the transfer because there's so much of a darker hue versus a light transfer that you may be putting onto the garment. So keep your colors in mind. If you're worried about a garment that's going to have dye migration, if you can try to push them towards a lighter shade or a white, you won't have to worry as much about the issues with dye migration as you will in some of these darker shades like a navy or a red. Also keep in mind that the polyester garments can vary from lot to lot. So it's always important to test them. So luckily, some of the manufacturers in the apparel decorating industry have came out with polyester garments, like Sanmar has, that are guaranteed not to block, are guaranteed to be bleed resistant and not bleed through your transfer. So if you need a dry fit that has a very soft transfer or you need a specific transfer that you're worried about not going to block, you can source garments from Sanmar like this red hoodie, and they call the technology Posi-Charge. So if you've ever been going through Sanmar's website at sanmar.com, you can look for the garments in their performance wear section that have that Posi-Charge technology. They will guarantee that no matter what happens, you're not going to fall victim to dye migration with that garment. So it's a perfect solution by starting and selecting the right garment. If the garment you need is not provided with that type of technology, maybe it's a team uniform or something special that your customers want that comes from another supplier like maybe Nike or Under Armour, I recommend testing them. Order an extra one and keep in mind that if it worked, maybe you ordered team uniforms this year and you did not have any issues with dye migration, next year the manufacturer may order the fabrics from a different country or a different supplier or wherever the fabric comes from to make those jerseys, and they could have a different lot. So it's very difficult to control, which is why testing is very key. So let's talk about how to test garments when we take them over to the heat press. I'm going to head over now to my Fusion heat press. I'll grab my garment and transfer. So I'm just going to load on the garment that we looked at a little bit earlier that we knew was going to fall victim to the dye migration. And we've pressed this a couple of times, so I'm just going to repress over it. That way I can show you how I would normally test a transfer like this. I'm going to load this garment onto my heat press, and I have my heat press up at what my temperature would be for this specific transfer. Now the transfer I'm applying is called CAD Cut Fashion Film. So Fashion Film, if you're not familiar with it, is a CAD Cut heat transfer material that's been cut on a vinyl cutter. It's a very thin heat transfer, so this replicates a thin heat transfer material or a plastisol ink or something like that that's very thin. So that's going to be very difficult for it to actually resist the dyes from coming through because of the thinness of the material. Just going to lay it down here, and all I've done is basically just cut a quick piece off of my roll of CAD cut fashion film. What that's going to allow me to do is just basically test a small piece, and you could even cut a smaller piece if you don't want to waste too much material. But that's going to allow me just to test a spot on maybe my test garment. That way I'm not going to worry about ruining it. If you wanted to, you could certainly cut the transfer that you're planning to apply and apply that. That way, if it doesn't get ruined, you've at least had one completed garment whenever you're testing it as well. But we'll go ahead and test this, see if it comes through immediately. I'm going to grab a piece of craft paper as well to cover all this up. And then we'll go ahead and apply it for what would have been the normal application at 330 degrees for 15 seconds. Zoom in here as well so you guys can see when I peel off the carrier. Pull it off to the side. That's my other secret there. So here we've actually, I can see it coming through the carrier of my fashion film, but immediately the dots from this pattern have already started to come through. So I know 100% that this garment is going to fall victim to dye migration. And that was kind of a hint by the pattern on the garment. That's some other things that we're going to talk about by deciding from a low bleed to a high bleed garment, which is what this one would be with this garment from Sanmar. So that's one way to test, is to take a garment from that lot, from that order that you've placed. So if you're ordering 144 pieces, order 145, and then you'll have your garment that you can test and make sure that it's going to resist it. This automatically happened immediately, but if it doesn't happen immediately, feel free to let it wait for up to 72 hours so that it really gets to experience that heat at 330 degrees. One other way to test the garments, and I'll go ahead and give you guys a sneak peek of what happened when I pressed that fully sublimated garment. If you've ever experienced sublimation, it looks like I've just actually dyed an entire garment because the inks from that fabric actually came through to my craft paper. One thing I do a lot of the times whenever I preheat polyester garments to test them is I will actually preheat them at the full application. So, for example, 320 degrees for 15 seconds. And then I'll see if this craft paper, which is just a parchment type of cover sheet, actually pulls out the inks. And if I see the inks on this cover sheet, then I know they're probably going to sublimate through my transfer as well because they were able to sublimate directly onto this transfer paper. So that's certainly one other way to test it. So either with a heat transfer or by testing it in the preheat process with the cover sheet. Now to give you another example, I am going to preheat another type of jersey, just to see if we get the same types of results from this type of team uniform as we're pressing it. So I'm going to load on. This is, again, a low bleed sublimated garment. So let's test it just with a cover sheet and see if we get the same types of results. Grab another cover sheet here. And again, I'm going to apply it for what I would normally apply this garment for at 330, 10 seconds. So when I remove back this cover sheet, it will allow me to see, it looks like it's very, very faint. I'm not sure if you can see it on the camera, but there's a little bit of lines up here from the seams of my garment and a little bit of shading. So while this garment is going to definitely have a tendency to do some dye migration, it's not quite as unstable as the one that I had just applied with the transfer on this patterned garment. So when I'm comparing these two types of garments, this is a great time to discuss the differences in polyester fabrics and different things like that. So there are two different types of polyester garments. I'll head these back over to the table so we can talk a little bit more in depth about them. So there's a difference in polyester garments, and how you select heat transfers for them and how you personalize them is going to vary depending on those different types of garments. So let's talk, you've heard me reference a couple of times about low bleed. So the two different types are going to be low bleed polyester garments and high bleed polyester garments. Low bleed polyester garments are going to be probably 90% of the garments that you come in contact with. They are the most popular in every shop, and they're most standard. So these are the ones that you're really going to want to learn how to decorate and find a solution for these types of garments. These are also the ones that are most unlikely to identify, because as you could see when I tested this football jersey, it didn't have as much of a tendency for those inks to sublimate. So eventually they would probably come through in about 72 hours, but it's not going to happen immediately. So I could probably send this out to my customer and not know until they bring it back to me and the numbers have turned light blue from the navy in this jersey. So with low bleed garments, luckily there are two great solutions depending on what types of garments and what types of designs you want to put on them to help reduce or eliminate dye migration. So when it comes to the football uniform, what I'm going to apply is going to be a product called CAD-Cut Thermofilm. So CAD-Cut Thermofilm, if you haven't experienced it, comes in two different ways. It comes on a roll where you can cut it on your vinyl cutter. So if you have vinyl cutters, you could custom cut graphics. It also comes in pre-cut numbers, so for team uniforms and things like that, it works perfect. The reason why this white number is going to work versus the white transfer that I had placed on another garment that was the fashion film is thermofilm is about double the thickness. So when you're looking for a heat transfer that's going to block dye migration, you have two options. One, you could select a heat transfer like thermofilm that's a little bit thicker, so it's going to resist the dyes from coming through just because the transfer is not that thin. So while it has a little bit more of a feel to it, it's going to block the dyes from coming all the way through because of the thickness of this material. In comparison with t-shirt materials like fashion film, this is about 220 microns of thickness. Fashion film is about 90. So you're looking well over double the thickness, which is what's causing it to help resist those dyes from coming through, which is great. While this, the other option that we're going to look at is being able to press, and we'll apply a design that has a sub-block adhesive. So let's go ahead and apply the thicker material and the numbers of thermofilm over at the heat press. Left my remote over here by the heat press. There we go. You guys can see me. I'm still here. All right, so I'll load the garment on, and then I'm going to apply the CAD-Cut Thermofilm. Now this is applying at that high temperature, 330 degrees for 8 seconds. That's the recommended temperature for this specific transfer. And so it is going to be high to where the inks are going to start to turn into that gas and be able to come through these numbers if they weren't thick enough. Line my 2 4s up. If you're using pre-cut numbers, you could always line them up with tape as well to help make sure they're straight and in line if you're doing multiples of these. Grab that cover sheet again, just because my pre-cut numbers don't have anything over them, so I want to definitely make sure to cover them with the cover sheet and ensure that they're not going to stick to the top of my heat press. Going to apply these down for 8 seconds at a medium pressure, which is about a 6 on the Hotronix heat press. And then we'll have a completed design. So again, if you have a vinyl cutter or if you just have a heat press, you can certainly order CAD-Cut Thermofilm. This is great when you have to decorate a team uniform or a garment that's going to have the tendency to have a low bleed dye migration, and you need a material that's single color. So for the vinyl cutter or for a single color transfer, Thermofilm is a great solution for this. The next option that we're going to look at is going to be another low bleed garment, and it's going to just be a regular dry fit hoodie. And we're going to apply that with the Sublistop transfer. So the difference between this transfer, and I'll zoom in so you guys can see the back of it. When I talk a lot about dye migration, keep in mind that dye migration is different from opacity. So if you order a heat transfer like this, and it has a white backing on it, a white backing is basically meaning it's going to be opaque on a garment. So if I have just a regular red cotton t-shirt and I want to put this transfer on it, any material with a white backing is going to keep it opaque and it's going to keep it true to its color. Remember, dye migration is different. So dye migration is when those inks actually come up out of the garment and through my transfer. So this transfer specifically, you'll notice, doesn't have a white backing on it. It has a black or a charcoal adhesive. So any Sublistop material or dye blocking material is normally going to have either a charcoal or a foil-based adhesive. those adhesives are going to keep the dyes from coming through the material. The nice thing about this, using this material with a charcoal adhesive in this application is that it actually still makes a thin material, so it's not a very thick material on the garment. Perfect for dry fits and light garments where you still want to keep the decoration light. So this product is called SuperTech Sublistop. It can be ordered if you have a BN20 or a VersaCam or any kind of print cut machine. You can actually print these on the roll in your transfers. And I'll grab the roll to show you guys kind of what the roll looks like and really explain you can see the white front of the material and then the black adhesive on the back, and that's the dye blocking for those of you that have the print cut machines. If not, don't worry, these transfers can always be ordered from companies like Stahls with that dye blocking adhesive. That way you're able to help have a solution for your customers and not have to have the printer yourself in-house. So let's apply this down to the garment and see kind of how it applies and stretches. The nice thing also is that it has some stretch to it. So definitely perfect for any of the polyester garments that you're decorating with that you're worried about dye migration. Give this a quick preheat. Grab a cover sheet just in case. Courtney, do I have any questions while I'm applying this down?
Yes, you do have one question. They want to know if the patterned sublimated jersey would have the same effect as that low bleed when you applied the material.
So the question was, will the thermofilm block the dye migration? That's a great question. So we're actually going to get to that shortly and explain it a little bit more, but the short answer is no. So right now we're working with what's called low bleed solutions, low bleed garments. So these are the ones that, the way you can tell the difference between a low bleed versus a dark bleed, or a high bleed I should say, is that a low bleed garment is the same color on the outside as it is on the inside. So it has actually been manufactured with the fabric all dyed at once. So it wasn't dyed after the fabric creation process. So the difference between this and a high bleed garment is a high bleed garment, like the one we had pressed originally, is that it has that pattern on the outside and the inside is actually a solid color like a white, or some of the newer hybrid garments we're going to talk about even have a color on the inside. So a little bit more difficult to determine and to identify. So the short answer is no, but we'll talk a little bit more about how we can overcome those and how to identify those types of situations as well here shortly. I feel like I lost my transfer. What did I do with it? I was talking. There it is. I got sidetracked and threw it over there. All right, so I'm just going to load this on and apply it. So this transfer, the CAD print or the CAD Color Sublistop product, applies for 5 seconds at as low as 280 degrees. So this product's interesting because it does offer that low temperature solution, which is perfect if you're looking to eliminate scorch marks as well as help inhibit the dyes from coming through the transfer. But of course that low temperature for dye migration is only going to be a temporary solution. But the nice thing is you have that option with this transfer. I am going to cover it with a cover sheet and then apply it for this 5 seconds. I'm a little bit hot at about 320 degrees, but for the application, I want to show you guys how it works and how it kind of applies down there. The nice thing about Sublistop is it does offer the variable temperature, so I could go up to 320 degrees if needed and if my garment could allow for that application as well. Seal that for another 5 seconds to get it down into the garment once I peel that carrier off. And that gives me my full completed transfer. So again, it's a nice solution that's low temperature, still very thin, very soft, and has a lot of stretch and rebound as well. So that makes it a perfect option. These transfers you can order 1, 2, multiple colors. So you can pretty much print any transfer that you want with this type of thing. So you're not limited on design or colors or anything like that when it comes to this type of solution for your dye migrated or your bleed chancing garments. Courtney, any other questions I've had come in throughout that application?
Just during that application, they wanted to know if the pockets on there would cause problems in the transfer.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So with hooded jerseys or hooded sweatshirts, you could use a pillow or a small pocket to eliminate any kind of pressure issue. Because my transfer was specifically a small left chest up here, it was far enough away from the pocket that the pocket wouldn't cause any type of durability issues with that transfer because it's still going to get an accurate pressure. If I had a full front design, I would certainly want to isolate this with an interchangeable platen or a heat transfer pillow to eliminate that. Other questions?
There are no other questions.
Okay, perfect. So let's go over, recap low bleed, and talk about the beast of high bleed garments, which are what you're probably going to come across coming up very soon with things like the digital camo and different printed items like the one I showed a little bit earlier in the class. So low bleed solutions, keep in mind, are those garments that have been dyed in the manufacturing process. They're traditionally a solid color on the front and basically a solid color on the inside. So they're going to match the two. Same thing with this football jersey that I had applied earlier from Teamwork Athletic. It was a navy blue jersey on the outside, and when I flip it on the inside, it's going to be navy blue as well. So the same thing on both sides. So I know this is probably going to be a low bleed solution. The way I was able to determine that is it was a standard 100% polyester garment, same color inside and out, and when I tested it over at the heat press, I was able to see that I was getting that little bit of dyes off onto my craft paper, and that was one way for me to test that specific garment. Likewise, I would have been able to test this garment as well to see if I had any kind of issues with dye migration and then choose the Sublistop product for it as well. So when it comes to dye migration in these garments, high bleed garments present a variety of other challenges for decorators. So high bleed garments are those garments where traditionally they've been fully sublimated after the fabric construction's taken place. So how you'll notice that is I don't have a garment, but I'm going to show you an example of a fully sublimated sock. Is the outside is going to be colored, the inside's still going to be white. So you know that the color was put on superficially after the garment was and the fabric was constructed. It wasn't something that was done in the fabric making process. So those are high bleed garments, and they are very unstable and very difficult to personalize and to print. So one place you normally see these are motocross jerseys, bicycling shirts, and different things like that that have that full color all over print, some t-shirts, things like that. So for those types of items, right now there's not a guaranteed heat transfer that's going to block those dyes. What I recommend if you run into those types of garments is to either run away from them or if you have to print them, try to push towards a dark heat transfer. So if I'm printing a garment that is has maybe some different colors and things in it, and I'm worried about that coming through a white transfer, if you put a black number and maybe thermofilm on there, it would be a temporary solution, or it would be a solution for you to be able to still have a black true number, because even if the colors come through, it's not going to change that hue of the black. It's dark enough to combat that, even if the dyes do come through the number. So my solution for those, the only one I really have long term, is going to be the thermofilm in a color black. But if you need a lighter color or a different number, it's really not recommended. Now keep in mind, some customers have had success with products like Sublistop on those garments. It's just not recommended because the dyes, as you saw when we pressed this garment, were so incredibly unstable and difficult for us to be able to get to. Any other questions, Courtney, as we're going on explaining this?
Yeah, we have a question. If you layer the film like Superfilm, will that stop the bleeding?
That's a great question. So if you layer a thin material like Superfilm, will it stop the bleeding? Superfilm, you'd probably have to have 4 or 5 layers before you got to where it was really going to affect it. I know I have customers that will apply a number and it starts to migrate, so they just stick another number on top of it. Obviously, that will add the thickness, so it works in the same way that thermofilm worked because it was a thicker material. Just be cautious that it's not a guaranteed solution. It's more of a short term, but you could certainly do, a black background maybe with a color number on top, and test it that way. But I always recommend testing and trying the different garments out and letting them sit for 72 hours, throwing them in a hot dryer, and really beating them up to where the garment gets to experience what 320, 330 degrees feels like for the fabric. And that's something that a lot of screen printers will recommend as well, is that you put them through the dryer and that you test them with your inks at a temperature that the garment's actually going to be at before you can see whether or not it's going to experience dye migration. All good on questions? Perfect. So I want to talk a little bit about hybrid garments and how there is a solution if you want to be able to decorate some different types of these really great, really cool camo sublimated garments. So when I talk a little bit about hybrid garments, you saw the gray when we printed earlier. This is a green patterned garment. I call these hybrids because they're more difficult to understand how to print them and whether or not they work, because they don't look like your traditional sublimated garment. Your traditional sublimated garment is easy to tell. Boom, I open it up. On the inside, it's white. I know I'm probably going to have difficulty printing that. This one, when I flip it on the inside, you can see is a lime green. So I'm unsure whether or not this was printed in the original fabric process or post-printed, or whether or not these dyes are going to be stable. This is the kind of garment that I'm definitely going to test. And when I tested this, I saw that those dyes were really unstable. I'd be cautious not to print these with any type of heat transfer right now, because they don't have a permanent solution. It's going to stay 100%, and I would feel comfortable myself sending to my customers and knowing for the life of the garment those dyes are definitely not going to come through. Luckily, there are digital camo garments on the market that provide a solution, just like that posi-charge technology that we saw with dry fits, where posi-charged Sanmar garments are going to guarantee they're going to be bleed resistant. Some of the new digital camo garments on the market, like the one from Augusta Sportswear, and I think they call it Moisture Wicking Digi Camo if you look on their website. But those garments will actually printed in a different, they're press printed versus a sublimated print. So they are perfect to decorate with products like Thermofilm or Sublistop, and those are going to guarantee to block the dyes. So if you want to print those for your teams this year, this fall, or this spring, feel free to do that with CatGut Thermofilm, and that product presents a great opportunity for you to do that by printing those types of garments and getting around the high bleed garments that they are and the difficulty there. Courtney, have I received any other questions?
There are no other questions.
Okay, great. If you have any other questions I haven't covered on dye migration, issues you've run into, feel free to start chatting them in now. I want to make sure I covered everything that I wanted to give you guys as far as tips. So I'll start recapping. Type those questions in as you have them. It looks like I've covered mostly everything. So to recap, look for garments that are going to be a low bleed or a high bleed solution and determine which ones they are. If they're a low bleed solution, you can definitely print them with products like CatGut Thermofilm or the Sublistop product, which can be purchased in CAD prints or for a roll-in printer. And that's great for full color versus single color. If you run into the high bleed garments, just keep in mind that there are options with the Augusta Sportswear that can allow you to print digital camo in great patterns and still print them with the same Thermofilm and the Sublistop products. If you also want to print the high bleed, I would recommend trying to stay away from them as much as possible, or trying to use a dark material. That's really the only solution right now for printing them. Of course, we're always working in the industry to come up with new ideas and new ways to print these great, exciting garments. One last tip, of course, was to look at those posi-charge garments from Sanmar. I absolutely love that garment. I order them myself often just because I know they're not going to bleed, so I can still use my thin, stretchable, really great materials on there, like CatGut Premium Plus. So posi-charge technology, Sanmar has a lot of garments with that. Feel free to check them out as you start to print your performance wear as well. Courtney, any other questions we've covered? Okay, great. Well, hopefully I've been able to give you guys some great tips for overcoming dye migration. For those of you that haven't experienced, I hope now you never do. And those of you that have, hopefully you found solutions moving forward. This has been a Stahls TV presentation. Thanks for attending.